kindness of the spiritual master, then you generate the emotion of faith, for instance. It said that your hair should stand on end, tears should well in your eyes. There should be that kind of response. Or it would be helpful if you did have that kind of response. Or thinking of your precious human rebirth.
Recording in progress.
This gratitude when you reflect on your precious human existence, and you have all these opportunities and freedoms. That would be an emotional response as a result of reflecting on your precious human rebirth. So anyway, there's always like an emotional, like something that moves you. And as I also mentioned yesterday, it's difficult to define an emotion. Modern science helps us with this, saying that, first of all, it's a subjective experience, okay, but there's a physiological response. There's an immediate response in the body. So if it's, for instance, love and compassion, you just become calmer. Your body becomes calmer, your breathing rate goes down, you breathe deeper and so forth. So there's always that kind of response. And then there's later on a behavioral response, because all our actions are governed by our emotions, whether positive or negative. Now here we're working towards positive emotions. Okay. Now the meditation we'll do, as yesterday, I try to lead you through certain steps, actually 4 steps. One is what's called affectionate love, where I remind you of your closeness towards sentient beings, what we have in common with sentient beings, to trigger an emotional response. What is that? That feeling of closeness towards everyone, that sense of care for other sentient beings. And it may be a little bit fake in the beginning, but just try whatever you can to feel this closeness, as if everyone was the closest person in your life. Right? Just generate that. Then I ask you to reflect on the suffering of sentient beings. Briefly reflect on that. What is the response? Compassion. The wish for sentient beings to be free from that suffering. To sincerely wish, may they be free from all these sufferings. Again, an emotional response. And then you have the altruistic attitude, which is this determination. You feel strongly determined. Also a type of emotion. I need to do something. I'll do something. I will do something. I will use my opportunity, my freedom for the benefit of others. And eventually, bodhicitta. Again, an emotional response, driven by great love, by great compassion, closeness towards all sentient beings. I will become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. So these are all emotional responses which then can govern our actions. Okay? If we had more time, I would do something else with you, where I ask you after the reflection to generate the emotion, of course, and then focus on the emotion with stabilizing meditation. That's the last part of analytical meditation, but we'll get to that. So let's do this together. As I said, I'll guide you through it. I'll ask you to visualize also the Buddha, you'll see. But you start off with some breathing meditation, just a short moment of breathing, a few seconds, half a minute, and then the meditation followed by the prayer. Visualize in the space in front of you an embodiment of all enlightened qualities in the form of Buddha Shakyamuni. that is right in front of you. Inspiring and guiding you. The Buddha inseparable from your Lama or your Lamas. And you're also surrounded by all sentient beings. Those you have a hard time with, you usually try to avoid. Right in front of you, seated in front of you. And then remember that each and every living being has at some point been so close to you. As your child, your mother, your father, your closest friend. So remember how every living being is just like us, wanting to be happy, not wanting to suffer. Just like us. They have everything they need to become a Buddha. So try to generate that sense of closeness. Sense of care. Towards every living being. And focus on their unwanted experience. So many problems we'll experience. Sickness, aging, and of course death. Generate the aspiration for them to be totally free from all their sufferings and the causes of these sufferings. Together with a wish, may I be able to help them overcome these experiences of dukkha, or dissatisfaction, together with its causes. And that great compassion then becomes stronger. gives way to the altruistic attitude that is now determined to do whatever is necessary, to do all we can to help each and every sentient being overcome suffering and its causes. Which of course we can only do if we remove all that's extra in our mind, removing all the afflictions and obstructions, and become enlightened. So let's generate the aspiration to become fully enlightened for the benefit of each and every living being. Try to really feel that wish, that aspiration with your entire being. So with this in mind, let's recite the refuge and bodhicitta prayer, keeping the visualization going. Sangye chodam soke chonam la chanchu padu dani japsuchi dagi jinso kipe sonam ki chola penche sangye drupashu. Sangye chodam soke chonam la chanchu padu dani japsuchi dagi jinso kipe sonam ki chola penche sangye drupashu. Sangye chodam soke chonam la chanchu padu dani japsuchi dagi jinso kipe sonam ki chola penche sangye drupashu. Okay. That was a little, okay, that's good. That was a little longer. I will shorten it every time because, well, we have only little time together and I really want to go through the entire material. What I can is to be seen. But again, I'd like to remind you to be as skeptical as possible. Whatever you hear, always question it. Always in the back of your mind, does that make sense logically and also according to my own experience? And to ask you, I'll also ask you, I did that yesterday, for homework. To make a little time, half an hour if you can, half an hour in the morning and evening if you can, otherwise maybe 15 minutes morning, 15 minutes evening, and meditate on what we've gone through today. So the material we've gone through. I've asked you to do that yesterday. I'll briefly repeat what I said yesterday, the main points. But what I ask you to do is, of course, analytical meditation, which the first part, as I said just before we generated the motivation, first you have a reflection, of course, but in order to have a response, an emotional response. So whatever kind of response that may be, even just thinking, wow, right? Like, oh my God, phenomena don't exist the way they appear. I mean, fake it if you need to, because when you fake it, you'll make it eventually. A lot of our Buddhist practice is faking it in the beginning, right? But that's true for everything. If you want to become like a bodybuilder, well, you probably won't look very eloquent or very, very graceful in the beginning, but then at some point you will, or a ballet dancer. So at some point it'll look graceful. So everything we go through the motions fast, And then at some point it becomes real. Oh, there's a chair. Yeah. There's still a spot, yeah. You may want to unfold it if possible. So, the point is, you have some kind of reaction, emotional reaction. And once you have that, even if it's fake, you focus on it single-pointedly. Of course, in the case of love and compassion, you meditate on those. What is the emotional response? Love and compassion. That's pretty straightforward. But for everything else, you need to go beyond the reflection and reach this point of like this motion and element. And once you've reached that, remain with it and focus on it. And that emotional response, first of all, there be a physiological reaction in your body, as with every emotional response, be it anger, it's a negative response, attachment negative, the mind is distracted, the body is no longer as calm as it used to be. But with these types of meditations, there is usually a positive physiological response. But even that is not that important. It makes us feel good in the moment, it makes us calmer, so that's great. But most important is the third component of an emotion, which is a behavioral response. It will affect your behavior, and that's all that counts. To become more kind, to become influenced by your, hopefully now, correct perception of reality. Where it's not like, oh, it's her fault, his fault, their fault, but rather, oh, maybe I'm not perceiving the situation in the right way. Maybe I should look towards my own mind. Not blaming yourself, that's another extreme. Instead of usually blaming others, then we blame ourselves. No, with a very gentle mind, then to look inwards. In response to having analyzed, for instance, emptiness. How the self just doesn't exist the way it usually appears to us. So the insult isn't as bad as it usually feels. Where's the I that perceives the insult? Where's the I that is supposed to feel hurt? And so we remain calm and respond in a more rational way to the situation. And that's all we want. We want to bring what we've learned into our daily life. Which is why Buddhism is actually more a form of psychology, the science of the mind, that helps us to cope with the challenges of life and go beyond the ordinary. All right. So what we discussed yesterday was mainly the I, how we misperceive everything, but of everything, most importantly, our own self. And out of this misperception, we consider ourselves to be more precious, our own happiness to be more precious, more important, which is a type of attachment to I and my happiness. It's just a natural response to a misapprehension we have, a misconception of reality. So what is so fascinating is that we become like a slave to this mind that constantly needs something that is never really satisfied. There's no end. There's always a need for more or something different. It's this constant kind of striving towards something else. So we can never fully relax because the self-centered mind is always telling us, be on your toes. Do something else. I'm bored. I need coffee. I need sleep. I need entertainment. Whatever. So we have no freedom. We really have no freedom in that sense. We're just driven the whole time. And as I said yesterday, well, if we had to do the same for someone else without payment, I don't know how long we would last. A few minutes, a few weeks, right? And we do this all the time. That's why we're so busy and exhausted. I mean, we need our 6, 7, 8 hours sleep. I mean, the self-centeredness is really exhausting us, which is also why when you meet lamas who have pretty much overcome their self-centeredness, they can teach the whole night. And the same the next day. I mean, we all think probably of lamas of Rinpoche, but doesn't. Of course, there's no exhausting self-centeredness. That's what really exhausts us. It's not our chef, our boss. It's not our colleagues, our spouse, our children, our parents. No. It's good old self-centeredness. It's always there. Our oldest companion, but giving us a really hard time and really exhausting us. Right? But it's not enough to say self-centeredness sucks. It's not going to take care of it. We need to understand, we need to take a step further. So what is underlying that self-centeredness? What are we getting wrong? What are we perceiving that is not realistic? Very important. And so, as I said yesterday, our mind just adds a little bit. It seems a little bit. It doesn't seem such a big deal. But that little bit that our mind adds in terms of how phenomena exist really causes so many problems. It can be something little. Think of COVID. How tiny was the COVID virus? And how many problems did it create? So similarly here, our mind adds a little bit, just perceives phenomena to have a certain characteristic. Every time we think of something, every time we perceive something, at the very least, there appears to be a way in which phenomena exist that doesn't accord with reality, and that gives rise to such problems. As I said at the very end yesterday, that's responsible for every problem in this world, even world wars. Okay, so it's our mind misperceiving things in a very profound way. So let's take a look at the text. We got to page 3, we got to emptiness. I haven't gone into emptiness yet. So before we talk about the true truth, we'll have to understand what is emptiness. And many of you already know, but you can't hear it enough. Until you realized it, the best way to come to an understanding is to hear about it again, reflect on it, and meditate. All right. So, in order to gain a correct understanding, this is at the very end of page 3, to gain a correct understanding of reality, so that's what we're aiming for, we need to follow a number of contemplative steps. Few steps of reflecting on now what is reality. The first step, most importantly, is to identify the object of negation of emptiness. Now, I gave you the example yesterday of the rainbow. Rainbows, very famous or very popular example. Now, if you think with regard to the self, for instance, of course there is a self, there is an I. There is an I, you exist, I exist. It'd be ridiculous to say you don't exist. It'd be ridiculous to say that I don't exist. But to the way in which it actually exists, we add some more. We make it more concrete and more solid than it actually is. So to take the example of a rainbow, of course a rainbow exists. It's an optical illusion. It appears to exist in a way in which it doesn't. Very concrete, located in a certain place, tangible almost. So it may lead us to the sense, I just take a piece of the rainbow with me. I'll cut out a piece. It's over there, very colorful. I'll go over there, get a huge letter, and cut out a piece, right? Well, this is our view. This is similar to our view of the self, as if there were something concrete, separate from mind and body, which by all means I need to protect. I need to satisfy. I need to gratify. I need to defend. Right? It's all about that. 99.9% of our interactions are based on that. We're so used to it. So, that being the case, now let's analyze that self that we imagine. Let's see, is it really there? That's the best way to go about it. Is it actually there? Okay. So, but for that, we need to identify exactly that. Oh, and I gave you kind of another homework in the form of a question. So for those of you who were here yesterday, I asked you if there is a sense of a self very strongly over here, and there's a sense for everyone else. I mean, what applies to myself also applies to you guys. I perceive you to exist inherently, as if there's a mind and a body and some separate I that I either like or dislike depending on how you relate to me, right? Okay, or I don't care. Like, dislike, don't care. That's kind of my attitude, but all in relation to my I. So I perceive you in a mistaken way, in a wrong way, just as I perceive myself in a wrong way. But although the perception is the same in that sense, except you're you and you're not I. So the label is a different one. Other than that, I have the same misperception. And still, I consider myself to be the center of the universe, and none of you. How bizarre! And that's true for your mind as well. So you perceive myself to exist in a solid, concrete way, just as you perceive yourself to exist, but you're self-centered or you're self-cherishing, but not me cherishing or other cherishing, right? Why is that? Think about it. I'll ask you again in an hour or two. Okay, this is something to consider. Maybe you thought about it at home, and if not, why? Okay, anyway, so what does Shantideva says? We have to identify the object of negation. He's very clear in his text, The Way of the Bodhisattva, Bodhisattva Chayatara, without connecting with the entity, which is the object of negation. The entity that is being investigated, the non-existence of the entity cannot be apprehended. It makes sense. Which aspect of the rainbow are we getting correctly and which aspect are we not? There is a rainbow. Okay, that part is true. There is something appearing to my mind. That is true. But which characteristic are we ascribing to the rainbow? That doesn't make sense. This we need to recognize in order to be able to negate that and be left with the existing rainbow. Okay, because it's mixed. To our mind, the rainbow, there is an existing aspect that appears to our mind and a non-existing aspect that appears to our mind. And in order to get it right, we need to know which part is fake and which part isn't. Same here with the self or other phenomena. The ignorance, usually that type of mind, that misconceives reality at the deepest level, that is a superimposing wrong consciousness, as opposed to a consciousness that denies something. It doesn't deny, it keeps adding. In fact, the lack of enlightenment is having too much in our mind, having obstructions in our mind, having afflictions in our mind that need to go. So it's not about reaching liberation, working towards liberation. What is liberated, of course, is the mind. The mind reaches liberation. The mind is enlightenment. So these are just words. But what do they actually mean? They mean that we remove something from the mind that's not supposed to be there. We remove a misconception that does not accord with reality and that is not in the nature of our mind. If it were in the nature of our mind, we couldn't remove it. Our mind couldn't exist without it. Therefore, reaching these states, going beyond the ordinary, so reaching state of liberation or enlightenment is all about removing that which is not supposed to be there. Okay? Because we added from the beginning, we added intellectually a mode of existence that doesn't make sense, which then gave rise to additional afflictions. It's all about removal. Okay, so anyway, our deepest misconception is a superimposing consciousness, because it superimposes on phenomena a characteristic that they just don't have. We must therefore begin our investigation of reality by negating this quality. We must start by negating the way in which phenomena do not exist, instead of positing the way in which phenomena do exist. We like to do it the other way around. We don't feel comfortable with negating, right? We like to affirm. We like the positive. So when I start talking about how phenomena do not exist, very quickly the question comes, but how do they exist? Right? There are even people who believe you cannot know a negative, which I would strongly disagree with. I mean, I know there's no monkey in front of on my table. Right? Otherwise I'd be going like, oops, monkey, sit still. Right? I mean, I'd be obstructed. So I can know that there is no monkey on my table, there's no elephant on my table, and so forth. And I can know a negative. Likewise, I can know that the self, the way it appears, doesn't exist. That this extra characteristic that I constantly perceive, or that at least appears, that it's impossible. Okay. So we must start by negating the way in which phenomena do not exist, since we've added in the first place, instead of positing, therefore, the way in which phenomena do exist. However, before we can begin to negate this characteristic, we must identify it. Because if we negate too much, we have a problem. We negate too little, we have a problem. So we need to get it exactly right. Negate enough to remove our problems, basically. Now, according to the Madhyamaka Prasangika, the following synonyms are listed for that which is to be negated. Now, some may find it helpful, some may think, oh my God. Some may think, oh my God, a whole list of things, it's hard enough to understand one of them. But they actually mean the same thing, just looking at it from a different perspective. So the first one is being truly established. The word established really means existent. Established is a very popular Buddhist term, but a little hard in English, like being truly established. It means the same as being truly existent, which doesn't really mean much to us at this point, right? It almost seems to suggest doesn't exist. So the first term may be a little hard to understand. But then, existing inherently. Literally it says in Tibetan, being inherently established, but it's the same as saying being inherently existent. Inherently. We use that word sometimes, right? It usually means like being a natural part of something, being fundamental to something, being inseparable from something. So water is inherently wet, for instance, right? Or playing, I don't know, what kind of sport is dangerous? Football, American football is inherently dangerous or risky. Right? So that's how we use the word inherently. So in everyday life, and it's not like, oh, if you're a Buddhist, you're no longer allowed to say it's inherently this, that, and the other. It may seem like we use it, and here's an object of negation. Now that needs to be explained. Okay? Existing ultimately, like existing absolutely. Again,
recording in progress.
So again, that doesn't really mean that much to us. But there are other words, like existing as its own suchness, as its own mode of existence. All right. Existing as its own reality. Existing by way of its own character, by way of its own nature. Existing substantially, okay, that's not that clear. Being able to sustain itself. Existing in such a way of being able to sustain itself. Existing from the side of the object, rather than being imputed by the mind. I'll explain all this. I'm just giving you the list here. Existing objectively. Existing by way of its own, through its own power, by way of its own entity. Existing in addition to or on top of that which is designated. or existing in addition to or on top of the basis of imputation, which are its parts. So these are all weird terms. When you read them, when you hear about them for the first time, it's like, oh, it's so confusing. However, if you've studied this more often, you will find one of these terms works well for you. Oh, this one, I can get a bit of a better sense. So you hear inherent existence, that's the most commonly used term. At some point, it's like, it's just a word. Like, inherent existence, what does that even mean? Yeah, nothing exists inherently, blah, blah, okay. But there's no real sense of what that means. So we need to shift away from this particular term and use another one, maybe that has more meaning for us. Anyway, so these terms basically mean the same thing. So what is our root misconception? That mind we have to really look out for. What does it do? It over-solidifies the status of phenomena. It perceives each and every phenomenon, everything we perceive, every thing that is part of our awareness, that is part of our daily reality, we perceive it as if it had an inherent, true, and self-constituting essence that exists in its own right. It's almost like the car is telling you, hello, I'm a car, can you see it? Right? It's almost like the world is waiting to reveal itself in the form of a car and a tree and another person. And the reason I perceive it is because it's already there. It's all already there, right? And everyone pretty much perceives the same, which is why I'm surprised when someone has such a bad taste. They put up these weird curtains. They've got a really weird taste. As if there was this objective beauty over there. Yeah, we say, oh, beauty lies in the eye of the beholder, yeah. But it doesn't feel that way. It makes sense. Beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. What's beautiful for one is ugly for the other. It doesn't feel that way. Deep inside, there is good taste and there's bad taste. And my taste is usually the good one and everyone feels. Unless it accords with my own taste. That's how it feels. Remember in the beginning, I said when you do analytical meditation, if it's just cerebral, if it's just in there, it's not going to change anything. You need to get onto the same emotional level. And I keep pointing at my belly. I don't know, in Buddhism you don't really have that idea. The intellectual is in the brain and the rest is in your belly. Okay, that's kind of more the modern way thinking. Modern way thinking, I guess. But you all get what I'm saying, right? Like deep within, it feels like you've got a horrible taste. These curtains, the way you dress, right? It feels that way. It feels that way. So it seems there's an objective beauty out there. It's got nothing to do with my upbringing, my cultural background, with whatever. No, it feels as if there were inherent beauty. Okay? So this we can all identify. I think we can all agree that there's really something wrong with perceiving an objective beauty. But objective I, that is okay. Wait a minute. Now that's taking it too far. All right. But anyway, the point being, it seems there is an inherent, true, and self-constituting beauty, or an essence for any phenomenon that exists in its own right. Our ignorance perceives the I, the body, other people, situations, cars, trees, and so forth as existing in a manner beyond their parts. It's more than just the parts, as having their own ontological status, their own way of being, as existing objectively out there. Oh, Zoom is gone. As existing objectively out there. Oh, it's connecting again. As existing objectively out there, independent of consciousness, and waiting to be revealed. Right? This is how it feels. You walk outside into the world, and everything is there, and you just happen to see it the way it is. Let's face it, is that your experience? Truly, absolutely, right? So, what happens is either we actively perceive this to be the case, with our mental consciousness, we actively conceive phenomena to have this mode of existence, or at the very least, it appears to us this way. Everything appears to us that way. That's why it's so difficult. I cannot point at a single mind and say, well, check things out with this mind, how it doesn't appear that way. No example. There's no example from our own experience right now. It's only logic that tells us this is impossible. It would be so absurd if things really existed that way. And that absurdity, that is part of the meditation. To point out the absurdity, what would be the consequences? In this particular philosophical school, the emphasis is very much on not saying this is wrong, this perception is wrong because, but rather, if it really existed that way, then X, Y, and Z absurdity. It would make sense. Okay, but let's look at this. So, anyway, what's important is to understand that phenomena always appear to us to exist in that non-realistic way, and sometimes we actively conceive them to exist in that unrealistic way. So let's take the example of a car. Either we actively perceive the car to exist inherently, objectively, etc. I don't know, do you give your cars names? In Germany you sometimes do. So when we were little, my dad had a car. He never named his car, but my mom named her car. Every car was called Julius. You know, the next Julius, the red Julius. It was always a Beetle, like a VW Beetle, and then later on it had different cars. But anyway, yeah, there was like a sense there was this personality. And because my mom liked like old cars, like once she had this Carmengia, I hated that car. I was driving it myself. In the winter, you had to switch on the heater, right? The garage had to do it, and the heater wasn't working well. So you always drove with an open window because you were sweating away. Anyway, but there was a sense, this nice old car with this personality. Our car, my car. I'm a cool 18-year-old one driving this Carmengia sweating away kind of thing. So there's a sense there's really truly something there. My house is there to protect me. I find it interesting when you see these cartoons where houses speak to you. It's almost like an expression of there's a personality. There's something from the side of the object, like a being, right? Like a self. Interestingly, in the highest philosophical school, they say selflessness, which applies to all phenomena, which seems to imply we perceive actually a self in things. In our building, in our house, a familiar friend, right? Our apartment, it protects us. It's like a protective entity, like a person, and very much in an extreme way reflected in cartoons. Talking cars, talking cupboards, and so forth. Those who have kids have probably seen your own share of cartoons just recently if you have small kids. Right, okay. Anyway, so let's take the example of the car. Either we actively perceive the car to exist inherently, objectively, etc., or every time we see or think of a car, it appears to our awareness to exist in this way. It appears to our mind as if the car itself determined the criteria required for being a car. Right? It's got nothing to do with us. There's something coming from the side of the object that tells me what it means to be a car. Does that kind of make sense to a certain degree? It doesn't feel that way, but does it sound familiar at the very least? Okay. So it doesn't seem to be unrealistic, but at least we're familiar with this. Okay. If something really existed intrinsically, objectively, so intrinsically and inherently are the same thing, as if there was something in its nature to be that way. If they really existed in that way, then a car would be inherent in its parts. It would be something, a carness, if you like, a carness within its atoms, its attributes, its functions, etc. So there must be some car-ness. That feels that way, right? There must be some essence that makes it a car. There must be an essence to Wayne, just throwing Jane and Kate and Joe and I don't know many Chinese names. Qixing, not Ping, and so forth. Right? There must be some essence to things, right? So therefore, if they already existed, it would not depend on anything. So it'd be already there. It wouldn't be dependent on anything. It'd be inherent in the car to be a car. You won't need a mind. You won't need anything else. It would just already be this particular phenomenon. It would also be findable among its parts. As concrete as it appears to the mind, we should be able to find it. Just as with the rainbow, going back to this analogy. If the rainbow existed the way it appeared, the closer we got to the rainbow, the clearer this should appear. Right? From far away, okay, so then I'm moving closer and closer. But what happens is, it starts disappearing. So I like the analogy of pixels on a computer screen. It seems very solid, right? But when you move closer and closer and closer and closer, what previously seemed so solid disappears. Or I really like, those of you who've been in Dharamsala and I've walked down the street where I live, there's a hotel with a mosaic of His Holiness outside. What is it called?
Royal.
Oh, Royal, it's called Royal. I only know the picture, I don't know the past. Every day I walk past it. So Royal Hotel. Okay, so there you see like an image of His Holiness as a mosaic. So if you move closer, His Holiness starts to disappear. You just see, individual little stones, and that's it. So that's fascinating that it seems so concretely over there, be it the rainbow, be the computer image, be the mosaic of Royal Hotel. When you look closer, it starts disappearing. Now these are all examples that you can use as of like something appearing as being very concrete, but it's merely an optical illusion. And even deeper than that is of course the optical illusion of something truly inherently there. Right? The others were just analogies, so don't go as deep as, the fact that phenomena don't exist in that deepest level, on that deepest level of inherent or lack of inherent existence, objective existence. But they're good analogies. However, such mode of existence, or the way it appears to us, that's impossible. It's impossible. A car is not inherent in its parts, because it has arisen dependently. It has arisen in dependence on so many factors. If it were inherent in it, you wouldn't need anything. It'll already be there. It'd be in there somehow. Why would you need anything else? It would have always been a car. So a car is not inherent in its parts because it has arisen dependently. Anything that exists is interdependent and exists in dependence in relation to other phenomena. It depends on its parts, and very important, on a conceptual consciousness labeling or designating it. If no one were to call it a car, or use another word that is equivalent to car, it wouldn't be a car. I mean, if no one, what does it mean? It means based on certain functions that we utilize, we call it a car. If everyone were to sleep in their car and wouldn't drive with it, it wouldn't be a car, right? It would have the function, yes, but no one is using it that way. So it would be a cheap apartment, or no, not even a cheap room, a tiny room. Oh, this is gone again. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So, therefore, it's dependent on parts. Anyway, if you and we get to this with the car, If there were an essence of the car, you could remove the parts and still be left with that essence. Pretty simple. Here, logically, it makes sense. If there were something beyond the car, we talk about the parts of the car, as if the car was some kind of owner, some kind of personality that holds all its parts. Well, remove the car and look for that. Pretty straightforward, right? And it depends on a mind perceiving it, a conceptual mind perceiving it. And impermanent phenomena that a car is part of, a car is an impermanent phenomenon, well, additionally depends on causes and conditions. Depends on many, many causes and conditions that were responsible to make it or to create this car. And so in the same way, sense objects depend on the sense consciousnesses perceiving them. And modern science very much supports that, right? Blue doesn't exist out there. The light waves. Sounds, the way a beautiful song, they're just pressure waves. That because of our unique sense faculties and our brain is translated into a beautiful song. It doesn't exist out there. So modern science and Buddhism have become very close. Just the fact that on the level of sense perceptions, what is actually there over there doesn't exist the way it appears to us. Blue and red and so forth, they're very unique experiences because of their light rays and the sense faculty and so forth. And in fact, we don't know whether we all see the same color, even if we all call it green. I may perceive blue when you perceive green, but we all call it green. Right? So that our experiences are very subjective. Science has proven that. Our sense perception. And Buddhism totally supports that. Okay. So already that helps us to understand things are not as they seem. We never question it. Our whole language is based on so many optical illusions. One is the sun never rises. The sun doesn't rise. Doesn't. No, we move. The sun is in the same spot, right? But we have poetry and songs about sunrises and sunsets, right? Yeah, so there's so many examples. Now we know, but you know, it kind of still sounds nice to talk about sunrises and watch them and take pictures and so forth. So it's not a big deal. It's not we suffer greatly because we perceive of it to rise or you know. Anyway, but of course, that is the first step to question. It seems so objectively and solidly over there, right? Good taste, bad taste. Oh, they've got really terrible taste. Maybe they perceive a different color than I do, right? Maybe my vomit green is a beautiful blue in their case. Or their, I don't know, whatever, weird yellow or weird blue, whatever, is actually very beautiful. So their curtains are like, wow, when they see them, but there's something with my sense perception, I perceive them in a color that I may not like, right? So again, it makes perfectly sense, supported by modern science. Okay. Anyway, having said this, so a car is not inherent in its parts because it has risen. Oh, I've read this already. So, therefore, since everything is dependent on so many other aspects, there is no inherent car or anything else that is findable among its parts. Nothing. The thing that we worry about so much, just a creation in our own mind, the self. Anyway, of course, in ordinary terms, and that's important, we say, for instance, so if nothing exists independently, but we still say that the USA is an independent nation, that Singapore is an independent country. So are we no longer allowed to say that? No, if you're Buddhist, never talk about don't talk about independence for Tibet. You're Buddhist now. Right? No. Of course. we still talk about something is inherent in this. It's nature, right? We talk about, look at the situation objectively. Don't we say that? Look at the situation objectively. No, you're not allowed to say that because you're Buddhist now. Okay, so let's look at this for a moment. All right. But that doesn't literally mean, so to say that the USA is an independent nation, or we consider a situation objectively, or that something is in the nature, it's in the nature of water to be wet, that does not literally mean that the USA, I use this USA because I use this text to teach in general, and so USA was the country of my choice, but anyway. So this does not literally mean that the USA is not dependent on anything else, or that Singapore doesn't depend on anything else. Where did the rain come from today? Is that Sumatra? I think it was Sonam who told me that yesterday or the day before. He said the rain comes from a particular island. I don't know. So you're dependent. He said it was Sumatra. Yeah. So anyway, your rain depends on where do you get your oxygen from? Where do you get? I mean, of course, Singapore is not totally independent, but we say we speak of the independence of the USA or in Singapore in the conventional sense, in relation to the fact that it's governed by the American or by the Singaporeans, and Singapore controls its own affairs. So it's in relation, independence on certain factors, that we say it's independent. But there's no absolute independent Singapore or anything else for that matter. That's important to understand, because sometimes people have a bit of an issue with that. Oh, on one hand, nothing exists independently, so I can no longer use the term. No, we're talking about an absolute independence. If something existed the way it appeared to us, it wouldn't depend on anything. So, of course, we can still speak of independence, like political independence. So, I don't know, I did this drawing so you can see the states. It's dependent on its states, it's dependent on the people. Anyway, sometimes just having that visual image may be helpful. Also, it is impossible to reflect on something objectively. Right? If you think of objectively thinking, think of it as objectively, since we can only think about it with our mind, and that is subjective. Right? Everything we do is subjective. Considering something objectively generally means to regard it without letting afflictive emotions like anger and attachment influence our judgment. So it's with respect to these particular states of mind that we don't allow these extreme states of mind. They're extreme. Attachment perceives the positive aspects of something in an extreme way. If you're attached to something, to you that person, for instance, a person, whoa, so great. It goes as far that you're worried that when they go out with someone, everyone will fall in love with them because you have a sense they're objectively great and everyone will see them that way. Right? Yeah, so there's a sense with attachment, it exaggerates. Just as our rude misperception does, it perceives the positive aspects of the object of attachment in an extreme way. The same applies for anger, where we see the negative of the object of anger in an extreme way, totally negative. And I like the word mad. I got mad. I do things that are pretty crazy out of my anger, and later I need to apologize for an extreme action. Right? So anger and attachment, they're all extreme. They don't perceive reality. They all exaggerate. And if I want to judge a situation according to the way it is, I better leave out attachment or anger, because it blurs things up, it skews things, it doesn't allow me to see reality. So that's what it means to look at them objectively. Okay, so those two I think are clear. Independent existence, objective existence, how they can be used in a conventional and in a relative sense. Furthermore, and this is where inherence comes from. Inherent, something is in the nature of something. Well, according to common parlance, according to the way we usually talk, it is accepted that wetness is the nature of water, right? Heat is the nature of fire, and so forth. And that's inherent in water. That's how we talk. It's inherent in water. But heat is not inherent in boiling water. Would you agree? Heat is not inherent in boiling water. Because, well, we need something else to get it to boil. It's not naturally hot because you need a stove at least to heat it. So one reason why boiling water is not considered to be naturally or inherently hot, here, inherently. This is the same way it's used in this context. It's not inherently hot. The reason is that its temperature depends on factors such as a hot stove that causes the water to boil. That's why we say it's not naturally hot. However, from the point of view of the Madhyamaka Prasangika school, they say wetness does not exist naturally or inherently in water either, because it depends on factors such as causes and conditions, its atoms and other parts, the sense consciousnesses that perceive wetness. If there were no mind that perceives wetness, if you have a mind that perceives wetness to be dry, if you were to touch water and it felt like sand, what would it be? Right? It's totally dependent on our sense perception. What about heat? Is heat inherent in fire? Well, very interesting. In India, when the temperature goes up to 40, sometimes even 50 degrees in some area, when someone comes from these hot areas, and they arrive in Dharamsala, 25 degrees, they're going to get out their woolies. I arrive from Germany, and I'm going to put on my thinnest clothes. Is it hot or is it cold? What is it? Is it hot or is it cold? For me, coming from Germany, I come from a winter, especially before global warming, I'd be like, whoa, heat wave. 25 degrees at some point was really hot in Germany. That was like the hottest it would get. So I remember in school, when I was in elementary school, like after a harsh winter, minus 15 degrees, it was plus 10. We were throwing up our jumpers. It's like, wow, it was plus 10. It was so hot. Right? After 20, it was like a 25-degree jump. We felt really hot. An Indian would probably freeze to death, especially when they were from Delhi. So what is it? Hot or cold? Depends. That's the answer. It depends. It depends on the sense consciousness, because being hot or cold is experienced by our body consciousness. And depending on how it's experienced, it's labeled hot or cold. Is it naturally hot? Is it no. And if we perceive water as human beings, of course, we all perceive water in a similar way. But if our sense perception, due to some mutation, would now perceive water to be dry, what would it be? Right? And if we wouldn't perceive water altogether, would there actually be water? If our sense perception were our sense consciousness or our sense faculty would no longer be able to perceive water, would it exist or not? The way we usually think, like, yeah, as long as I can't see it, it's not there. Therefore, there are no other realms because I can't see them. So they're not the smells that dogs perceive, How many more smells do they perceive? Do we say they don't exist because I can't perceive them? No, I can see a dog, so that's okay. It's accepted that there are more smells than I can perceive, right? But honestly, our sense perception is so limited as humans. Whales perceive so much more. Dogs and cats and, cows, the taste of different grass. I've never bitten in a piece of grass. I couldn't tell, right? So the point being that our perception is so limited. And still we think we see the whole thing. And it's objectively out there. So no wonder we suffer. No wonder we suffer, right? Because we believe in what we perceive. Okay, but anyway, going back to wetness and to fire. So wetness is inherent in fire. Okay, but you need a sense consciousness that perceives this wetness. You perceive a concept, you need a conceptual mind that labels wetness. But in the conventional sense, we can say that the wetness is that wetness of water is in the nature or inherent in water in relation to the fact that water is always wet. We can use it, we can still use it, this term, right? So there are different reasons for why we say wetness is inherent in water, etc. But that doesn't mean it's independently though, and it's not dependent on our mind, and not inherent in the absolute sense. It's not inherent in the absolute sense, because that would mean 25 degrees would be absolutely either hot or cold. You couldn't have these two cases. All right. Okay, so how we with time? Yeah. So you've got a little drawing. Heat is not inherent in the boiling water. Right? In the beginning I used more drawings, and in the end I thought, well, I guess it gets a little clearer. I'm not so sure. I was really into drawings for a while, and then eventually I thought, okay, they're quite nice, but not absolutely necessary. Okay. Heat is not inherent in the boiling water because it depends on the heat of the stove. Wetness is not inherent in the water because it depends on its causes, its condition, its parts, and so forth. So really, in an absolute sense, it's not inherent in it. Therefore, there's nothing that can exist naturally or intrinsically as I, others, my body, samsara, nirvana, good, bad, and so on, since these things can exist as such only in dependence on other phenomena. Now, I tell you a funny story. Geshe Kelsang once gave a teaching, a review class in Dharamsala. Many of you know Geshe Kelsang is such an amazing Lama, I would say. Although he doesn't have officially that status, but I think he is. So once he gave a teaching and I was translating. Quite a few foreigners were there. I don't know what teaching it was, probably, many Singaporeans maybe, or Taiwanese, or Koreans, I don't know which teaching. Anyway, and Geshe said, his first words were, the Buddha is bad. Love is bad. Anger is good. And I was like, I was misunderstood. Listen really closely. And then I asked Geshe, did you just say the Buddha? Yes, the Buddha is bad. So you mean the Buddha? Yeah, just translate. And people were like, no, they didn't do that, but they were like shocked. Buddha is bad. Anger is good. So they listen really carefully, right? Anger is good. Love is bad. And confusion, there was confusion everywhere. And then Geshe said, the Buddha is bad because the Buddha harms suffering. Love is bad because love destroys suffering. Anger is good because it creates suffering. So in relation to, we say something is bad when it destroys something. So we can apply this term when we want to talk about something destroys suffering. Now, if our mind like to suffer, right now it doesn't. I mean, our mind is naturally, and I'm not talking about our afflicted or deluded mind, our mind naturally wants to be free from certain experiences we call suffering. But if hypothetically, let's say hypothetically, we lived in a world where we enjoyed being insulted, we enjoyed being hungry, we would hate it to eat. Just think this, it sounds bizarre, but we can imagine it, we can at least hypothetically, we do that when we debate, for instance, hypothetically, if something were the case. I love to be insulted. I love to have pain. Oh, I'm free of pain again. I need a pain creator. Not a painkiller, but a pain creator. Do you have a pain creator? I stopped having a headache. It's so annoying. I had this great headache for days and now it's gone. Right? I mean, imagine. We were like that. Then what would the Buddha tell us? Be a little bit more selfish. Be a little bit more selfish. Kill and steal. You want a headache? Hit someone over the head and hope you get the results soon. You see what I'm saying? So it's only in relation to what our mind wants. Is there some inherent good? No. It's not inherent. There's no inherent good. There's no inherent bad either. So when we talk about refraining from killing, it's what other people don't want. People don't want to be killed. And because we're connected to everyone else, the experiences we give out come back to us eventually. And if we wanted to be killed, well, we should go ahead and do it. But we don't want to be killed. We don't want to lose our life. That's why we shouldn't do upon others what we don't want to be done upon ourselves. It's just because what we don't like. Is that actually a Christian saying? Oh, okay, just because I don't sound familiar. Anyway, so the point is, and yeah, you find this in many other religions as well. There are great similarities. So instead of saying it's karma, it's God that, dishes out punishment or reward. It's still the same idea that something comes back or not. And that's just a law of nature. In the sense that there is no good and bad from the side of the object. We label it good in relation to what we want. That's why you can have an election in the US where someone says Trump is good and someone else says he isn't. Someone else says Kamala Harris is good. Because in and of themselves, they're neither. It's in relation to what people want. Right? It's all in relation to what we want. We say one candidate is good and one is not. And this goes as far even with the Buddha. The Buddha is not inherently good or not. But because of what we want, the Buddha can guide us to reach that state. That's why we label the Buddha as good. Yeah. Objectively, it's neither. How much freedom is in there? It feels like everything is already determined. And our mind is just thrown into it. And no. It's all dependent on the mind. Which brings us so much freedom, actually. There are different ways of talking about freedom. Yesterday I talked about the absence of freedom because of our misperception of that. But there are many different ways in which we can think of freedom. First of all, it's all dependent on our own mind. The only thing I can change in this entire world is my own mind. My own mental consciousness. My sense consciousnesses I can slowly change by changing the body. I can do that. But the thing I can immediately change is my mental consciousness. I cannot change any of you. I cannot change this world. I can try to influence people, but not even the Buddha can change me, right? Not even the Buddha can change anything, but can guide people, be an example, help people, guide them, but not more than that. So, in my own case, all I can do is change my own mind. That's all I need to change. Isn't that amazing? Emptiness is in my own hand. Happiness is in my own hand. Why? Because it's all dependent on my own mind, on how I perceive things, understanding how phenomena really exist, and removing my problems, my sufferings, my misperception, perceiving things as objectively over there, as inherently this, that, and the other. And in particular, this inherent I constantly need to gratify. My mind makes me believe I constantly need to protect. I need people to like it. How terrible. How can I make people to like it? If they like one thing one day and the next day something else, and then they forget about me. Isn't that difficult? Yeah, pleasure, to have pleasure all the time. When there's no inherent pleasure, it's just a reaction in my body. It depends on my mind, on how I label it, and of course on my previous actions. So I can change my own mind, and that is the only change that is truly profound and the only change I can make. How much freedom is that? Right? Anyway, I've gone a little bit astray here. I've gone a little bit too far from here. So let's go to continue with the text. Yeah, still got 15 minutes. Now, what is the way to do this? It sounds all nice. I can easily talk about it. Sounds nice. But it goes in here, and then it's like, it's not going to profoundly change our life. Unfortunately, when it comes to Buddhism, listening is only 5%. 5% is listening, 10% is listening. And there's a lot of work we have to do ourselves. A lot of work. So that's the bad news. I wish someone could do it for me. Listening to a lesson, that's just not enough. You need to retain it and then really think about this. Really think about this and bring it onto an emotional level to make changes. But anyway, for now, that's what we're doing. We're going through these different ideas, and then hopefully we'll find a way to actually bring them into our life. We'll talk about this more later. So, the first step, of course, is ultimate analysis. So this is part of these 3 steps, listening and then analyzing. So this is called ultimate analysis. Why is it called ultimate analysis? Well, we're not analyzing things like, is this globe round or not? Is the earth round or not? Is water made of oxygen and hydrogen? That's not an ultimate analysis. That's just analyzing the things we have, around us, and coming to a certain conclusion. No, here, ultimate analysis is this. Having identified the object of negation, so to a certain degree, I think we have, the next step is to investigate whether the object of negation actually exists. So whether such a true and objective existence holds up to analysis. Okay, so we have all the sense. As I said before, there's this objective reality out there. Think of beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. But actually, no. Beauty is that which I find beautiful. Right? Think of that. Think of a sense that there's a concrete I need to satisfy. I need to find success for, and so forth. So that's the object of negation. If you have some kind of sense of what it means. Now, let's investigate it. Does it really exist? So the example that, it's nice to take different examples to fully understand that this can be applied to everything. So let's take the table, right? Take this table. Does such a table really exist the way it appears? We need to analyze whether there's an essentially existent table, a kind of tableness. Again, using that word ness, so a kind of tableness that could be found among the parts, the shape and color of the table. So oftentimes the table is used, well, first of all, when you teach, there's usually a table present. In the old days, they used 2 other examples. Are there 2 examples you're familiar with that are always used in Buddhist philosophy? Objects, like certain objects.
Flowers.
Pardon?
Flowers.
Huh?
Flowers.
Flowers? Yeah. Traditionally not flowers. But maybe, some of the lamas may use flowers now. Usually there are 2 objects. Don't worry. Pardon? A pot. Which I think the better word is a vase. Because what I believe is they mean the vase. You have a vase in here? Yeah, like a vase, like an initiation vase. And usually in the traditional monasteries, you have like an initiation vase. It's got like an opening, and then it's kind of bulbous, flat-based. Oftentimes it has a handle or not. So in every hall, in every meditation hall, or in every prayer hall, we basically have a vase. So a pot, sometimes people call it pot, but I always think of a cooking pot when I hear pot. But pot is another translation. And then there's something else, another object.
The pillar.
A pillar. Good old pillar. Because in every prayer hall in Tibet, the way they built their prayer halls, there were pillars. We're not that familiar with pillars. No pillar in Singapore, not many pillars in Singapore, right? In some places, of course, but you know how to build buildings without lots of pillars. But traditionally in Tibet, they used a lot of pillars. So basically the example we can use here is a table, because nowadays we always have a table in front of us. And a table, the good thing about a table is it doesn't have that many parts. So it's pretty simple. This is also something Geshe once did with a table. First of all, someone gave him a table he could take apart. So that was already quite helpful, take apart the table. And so at some point he didn't have a table, so he said, for instance, there's a really solid table. Okay, very solid table. Now if you remove the legs, do you still have a table? The answer is no, right? So you just have that upper, so this kind of upper surface. All you're left with is that. Okay, so you hold on to this surface. Someone is holding on to the surface. And while you're holding on to the surface, I remove the legs. Are you still holding on to a table? But you never let go of what you were touching previously. You hold on to this table. Now it's a table. You remove the legs. Now it's not. But you're still holding on to the same thing. If it were inherently a table, then even if you removed everything around it, you're only left with this piece, you would still hold on to a table. If the table existed inherently, you see the absurdity? If it were in and of itself a table, it didn't depend on its parts or my mind labeling, I could remove everything around the table and you would still be holding on to a table. Does that make sense? So you're holding on to the same thing. Nothing has changed. You hold on to the same thing. So the position of your hand hasn't changed. What you touch hasn't changed. But it's no longer a table. If it were inherent in the table, it would still be. Isn't that incredible? If you think about it, if it were inherent, with a car it's the same. Love your car. Nice car, right? It's like it takes you from here to there, it protects you from the rain, blah, blah, the whole thing, right? So you hold on to, what would you hold on to? The engine, the steering wheel. Okay, hold on to the steering wheel. And someone comes along, in some area you just drove to, and there's skillful thefts, and you close your eyes for a moment, you hold on to your car, and when you open it, all you're holding is your steering wheel. If the car existed inherently, you'd still be holding on to your car, because previously you were holding on to your car, right?
Recording in progress.
Yeah. So in that way, it applies to everything. Fortunately, you can't do that with people. It's not like you hold on to the eye, and then, you hold on to the person, and then they die, and they're no longer the person, strictly speaking. We don't eat chicken, by the way. A dead chicken is not a chicken, right? It's kind of really bizarre. It's okay, you can still say you eat chicken, but I think that's why we say we eat beef and pork. You don't say we eat cows and pigs. So except for chicken, strictly speaking, we debate this a lot. When you cut off the head of a snake, sorry, that sounds cruel. People usually don't like snakes that much. It's not a cute bunny or something. It's like cutting off the head of a snake. We debate this usually, right? And in the debate, you don't think much about it. But just saying, the cut off head of a snake, is that the head of a snake or not? Actually, strictly speaking, it's not. It's not a snake. A snake is a living being. This is the body of. This is the continuum of an entity that used to be the head of a snake, strictly speaking. So what does it mean to actually be a snake? So not only do we just label things, sometimes we label incorrectly, right? But this is okay. As like common parlance, we can say it's the head of a snake, and of course it would be ridiculous to change that. But when we study philosophy, the point I'm trying to make is that actually, what is the definition of something? How do we label it? How do we label correctly? And do we sometimes get it incorrectly? And we do. Certain things like, I have a lot of sun in my room. Oh, I'm glad I don't have sun in my room. My room be torched. I wouldn't have a room if I had a lot of sun in my room. It's just a way of speaking. What you have is the rays of the sun. So giving the name of the cause, which is the sun, to the result. Yeah. So this is not wrong. Doing this is not wrong, but it's understanding language better, understanding labeling better. And in particular, when we debate, it's very important that we agree on how we apply terminology. Our debate is therefore called the study of definitions. So we can debate for hours on whether Buddhism is a religion or not. If you define religion differently than I do, we may actually be agreeing on what Buddhism is or not, but since we use different definitions, we think we disagree. Therefore, one of the main points we first do is get the language right, agree on terminology. And this is difficult as part of Buddhist study to get used to the jargon. That's quite challenging. Yes, when you come to Buddhism, it's difficult. That's the main obstacle. But like everything, you get used to the terminology, you slowly understand it, and then understand the concepts. Okay, but having said that, the point is therefore that nothing exists in and of itself, which is why we can use language loosely, because it's all dependent on just how we apply labels, right? Okay. Anyway, ultimate analysis is not taking for granted, not taking things as they are, but to actually analyze, not the way they appear to us, but now to check, does that appearance accord with reality? So to look for the tableness, look for the table the way I described before. It is important to understand, and now this is really important, that here we do not analyze whether the table exists. We don't analyze, does the table exist or not? No. We analyze how it exists. We analyze how the table exists, not whether it exists. However, since ordinarily we are unable to differentiate between the table that exists and the inherently existent table, for us they're the same. Because for us a table is an inherently existent table. It may seem that we're actually analyzing the existence of the table itself, right? Because when we start looking for the inherently existent table and we can't find it, for us the table disappears. Because how could the table exist other than inherently? So it's very hard for us. Everything disappears. We look for the I, we can't find the inherent existent I. Well, we believe there's nothing there then, because for us the I has always been inherently existent. So it's a very normal reaction. The Buddhist scriptures describe numerous types of reasoning that logically refute the object of negation. All right. So, if for instance, I give another example, traditionally, if it's vase in the beginning, it's vase all the way through. But I prefer using different examples. I think it's in some texts do go from this example to that to get a sense of the pervasiveness. That this is true for cars, for the eye, for others, for houses. And houses, think of your own house or your own place of living. There's an attachment, there's a feeling of like an emotional connection to that place. So if, for instance, a house existed inherently and was able to constitute itself, he also uses a different term. It's just a house in and of itself, just exists as a house. We would be able to see the house without having to depend on seeing anything that is not the house. If there was like this essence of house, right? It existed inherently. You don't depend on seeing something other than the house to see the house, right? This is does that make sense? So if the house were a house in and of itself, it was not dependent on something other than itself, right? Probably have to take a break. I see the confusion in some faces. Some of you are more familiar with it and others aren't. So let's take a break. It's a good time to take a break. All right. Okay, so see you in half an hour. And usually I stay behind. You're welcome to ask. That's okay, right? I just continue sitting here and people can ask questions. No, I don't need to get off. I usually like to answer questions. Is that okay?